Got a lively crowd here. Okay, so I'm gonna do this, and then and you guys can sort of, if you think of questions that maybe you've heard before from other people related to these topics that I bring up, like feel free to turn your mic on and ask a question, or wait till the end. Because part of this is that we're going to do this. Melinda and I are going to do it as a Mullen presentation in a couple months. So we really want some more feedback on it, to think of other, like other things that people have heard that they commonly ask. Or if, we talk about something that you've never heard and don't think is really, even worth addressing, that we could maybe replace with something else, because we don't want to have just like, 25 of these things either. So we're going to go through here. This is the title of the webinar. We had a lot of different titles that we went through, but I think, is it true that is kind of what we hear a lot with these kinds of, when people come to us and ask about something that they've heard around the Minnesota grapevine. So first we're going to do a poll. So I'm going to, and I couldn't put that in the slide, so I'm going to have to do it. Oh, never mind. I don't own the presentation, so I can't do a poll. That's good to know. So Melinda and I had talked about, when we designed this presentation, we were like, oh, we could do every single one could be a poll, and that would be really interactive. We could have people say, true or false about all these. And then we realized that the spoiler is that they're all false, because they're all myths. So it was pointless to do that. So we were like, well, maybe we could do one or two. So maybe when we do this the next time, we'll make sure that we can actually do a poll, or I'll have John set up the polls, because I think he owns this link.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, you do, right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so maybe we can do that next time. Or if we do it again, it might be in Zoom or something. So that's a little bit different. So the true or false, the first true or false is you can only have one grant at a time. So this is obviously false. Your organization, so where this is tricky and why people think this, is your organization can't have multiple funded phases of the same project open at the same time. So you can't have overlapping phases open that are being funded open. But if you're working on more than one project, and who isn't at all of these organizations, then you can absolutely have multiple applications and grants going at the same time. The real limit that we tell people is your capacity, your organization's capacity to keep track of and complete the projects on time. That's the most important thing. The next poll, this was our second poll, was only one grant per county is allowed at a time. This is another thing we hear, and sometimes it's per county or per, region or city or whatever. So we hear different versions of that one. And this is also false. There are no set limits on the number of grants allowed per applicant or per county. However, because one of our tasks is to distribute funds statewide, it is true that there's competition between organizations in each competitive round. So just keep that in mind. Another true or false, we only fund history organizations. And this is really, really false. Many of our grantees are county historical societies or museums or organizations that are housed in buildings on the National Register. But history organization is not one of our categories of eligibility. Your application just has to prove that you can do a history project that's important to Minnesotans, and you don't need to be, an official history group, whatever that means, to do that. And here we're always kind of emphasizing what our eligible organizations are. One is federally recognized tribal organizations, or a 501c3 nonprofit, or units of state or local government, or educational institutions. And our manual has a lot more information about what some of the details are for those different categories of eligibility. Next, I heard this one recently. This is actually, I thought this was a really interesting one to hear, that people have heard this. And this is what kind of my favorite one that we're busting, is if you serve on HRAC, which is the Historic Resources Advisory Committee that makes the recommendations for the large grant round, your organization can't apply for grants. So this is totally false. If you're on HRAC, or someone in your organization is on HRAC, you can still apply for small grants and large grants. In the large grant round, you would simply declare that you have a conflict of interest on that application. You wouldn't see it, you wouldn't review it, and you would step out of the meeting during the discussion and the vote. And that's it. It's very common. If you've ever been to an HREC meeting, you know that people are coming in and out constantly because of conflicts of interest. And so this is something we're very familiar and comfortable with. We have a good process for it. So please don't decide you don't want to be on HREC because your organization wants to apply for a grant. You can do both. Oh, this is another one, because people sort of think of, they kind of think that we operate like a foundation, and that the grants office or MNHS's strategic goals decide what kinds of projects we want organizations to do. This is totally false. We are not a foundation. We don't have a mission or rotating funding areas. Well, MNHS has a mission, but that's aside from this. So we fund projects, this is what's in statute, that preserve and enhance access to Minnesota's cultural and historical resources, and support projects of enduring value for the cause of history and historic preservation across the state. We leave all the rest up to you, the organization, that applies to tell us what you want to do and why your project should rise to the top in each competitive round. So again, this is a matter of, every round is competitive, and it's your job, and you get to prove, why your project is worth funding. And we don't decide that. We simply have to follow this statement that's on this slide in bold. Oh yeah, this is another one. You have to hire a professional grant writer to write up an application that's going to get funded. And you can't use grant funds to pay staff. These are really kind of two different ones, but we have so many, we were trying to combine them at this point. So both of these are false. If your organization already has an existing relationship with a grant writer, or you have one on staff already, that's great. That's fine. That's, grant writers have, really important skills, but we don't recommend seeking one out if you don't have one. We really believe strongly that you and your organization are the best people to tell us about the project. And you definitely do not need prior grant writing experience to have a successful application. We don't have numbers on this, but lots of grants get funded every year, and they're just people that are working at these organizations that write the grants. They do not necessarily have any more grant writing experience or specialized grant writing experience than anyone else in the field. And, the other one about funding staff is you can't use grant funds to pay staff. So in many cases, we can and do fund new staff for the duration of your project. So project staff. What you can't do is pay existing full-time staff with grant funds, but there is a little more to it when you talk about existing part-time staff. But that's kind of hard to explain quickly. I didn't want to go into all of that. So you can look at our grants manual for details, or just email us at grants@mnhs.org. We will very happily talk you through some of those details, because we do a lot of our projects fund staff, and we know that's something that a lot of people are looking for with these projects, is that they need to bring people on in order to do some of this work that they want to do. So that's very fundable as long as you follow the guidelines. Another myth is that the money comes from the Minnesota Historical Society. And this is kind of related to the idea of, that we decide what we want funded. So that's false. The money comes from the state of Minnesota, and our office, those of us in the grants office and the Heritage Preservation Department, are tasked with administering it in accordance with best practices. The money is appropriated to MNHS through the Legacy Amendments Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, which is a mouthful, in order for us to administer competitive grant rounds. So, and this is kind of the important thing, any money that isn't distributed in a round or is returned to us due to canceled grants or unspent funds goes back into the coffer for the next round of these grants. Or if the funding period has expired, it goes back to the state. It's not, MNHS doesn't decide how much is budgeted for us to give out. It's not, it's not broken down that way. So that's that explanation. Oh, and your organization, another one. Your organization has to pass a financial review. So we hear from people a lot of times, especially really small organizations, that are really concerned about this, and concerned if they don't have enough, years of experience or years of financials to show, and they don't, or they're afraid that something's wrong in their finances, or that we're going to kind of reject them for eligibility because of that. So that's basically false. If you're applying for a large grant that's over $25,000, you do have to include documents in your application for our grants manager to review for financial stability of your organization, to kind of prove that you can handle that amount of money. But that's the main kind of financial review guideline or requirement that we have. And you can find a lot more about that in our grants manual, or again, email us at grants@mnhs.org, and one of us will get back to you. This is kind of a long one. This is interesting. Something that I think is really neat about this program that it is definitely an impediment with other grants is a lot of places require match. So we do not require match almost as a rule. The note at the bottom kind of goes into a little more on that. The legacy grant programs, which are the historical and cultural heritage grants and the heritage partnership program do not require matching funds. You do not need to have a match for any of those grants. However, if you have any kind of cash match or in-kind match, absolutely include that in your application. And there's a column in the budget. You'll see it. You can ask us questions. If you don't know how to describe a match, we really still want to see that, even though it's not required. And then for large grants, having a substantial match can make your project more competitive, because ATRAC, the group that makes the recommendations, likes to see that kind of support. So it shows that you have institutional and community support for this work, for this project, that you have buy-in for your organization to get this work done. And that's something that can make your application more competitive. So we really strongly recommend match in that situation. So the exception is the state capital project grants and aid, which we have funding for now. I've never personally gone through this around myself on this one, but that one does require a one-to-one match for funded projects. And that is proposals for construction projects from public entities such as counties, cities, and townships. And structures receiving the grants must be owned by the grant applicant, and preference is given to structures listed on the National Register. So this is something you're going to, if you're hearing from our office a lot, you're going to start hearing a lot more about the capital grants and aid program. So if you want to learn more about that, if that's interesting to you and that applies to your organization, please email us and we'll put you in touch with the right people to talk to about that. Another one. Melinda wrote this one. We are a grants administrator, not an HMO. A lot of people kind of send us the RFPs or want to know if they need to see if we need to see their RFPs. That's request for proposals, or that you have to choose a preferred consultant from a list or something to work on your project. So that is false. We don't actually review RFPs in our office, and you, as the organization, should choose the consultant or the contractor that you feel will bring the best value to your project. And we don't require that you choose the low bid. That's definitely an option if you feel good about that, if you get some bids and you think the lowest one is the best, but it's not a requirement for funding. So, that's one thing you don't have to, we ask for a lot of information from our applicants and grantees, but you definitely don't have to worry about the RFPs going through us. This is another one that I like. True or false? Your organization won't get a grant if you bug us. That is false. Please talk to us. We like talking to you. It's a big part of our job, and bugging us is and bugging is in quotes, is a great way to get feedback on your application before the deadline. The main thing that we would say about this is don't procrastinate if at all possible. We get busier and busier as the deadlines get closer. So the earlier you ask your questions, we can be sure to get you an answer, and most importantly, have time for follow-up questions, because usually these kinds of questions, there's more details that we want to be able to have a conversation with you about. It's very rarely like a yes/no thing. So the earlier you get in touch with us, the better we can serve you in that way. And then ultimately, the more competitive your application would be. And this is the last one, I believe. MNHS will own my project and make it part of our collections. That is false. We administer the funds. We do not keep your project's final product, and we don't want it. That's not part of our collections policy at MNHS, and it's not part of what our office administers. Your project is yours, and part of your responsibility as the grantee is to find a way to securely keep your project's product and make it publicly accessible. So you do not, MNHS is not going to own that at all. So yes, that was last. If anyone has any questions, I think I blew through those pretty quickly. Or if anyone wants to ask has heard anything else about the program that you're wondering is true or false, or want more details on, you can ask me, or definitely send us an email. You know, we all in the grants office obviously have our own emails, but grants@mnhs.org. Several of us check multiple times a day, so it's definitely the best way to get in touch with us. And really, you know, remember that bugging us is not going to hurt your chances, your competitiveness for an application. We really do want to hear from you. So that's all. Does anyone have any questions?